Turning on recording. Okie dokie. Well, we are so glad that so many wonderful local people in our community have joined us today, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon to chat with us a little bit and learn about invasives and ivy and how that's affecting our climate change in our local communities and what we can all do together to help. So just a little background, we are a Few Cool Hardware stores, a group of 13 locally owned and operated Ace Hardware locations in the DC, Baltimore metro areas. We're really glad that you're here for the first in a string of chats that we're doing as part of our annual garden party. Usually we would have a big event, but since we're still trying to be cautious and make sure that we're following all of the proper protocols, we decided to take our event virtual and host a series of gardening tips, stories, and other tidbits from our nonprofit partners, product vendors, and in-store experts. This garden party celebrations from Earth Day to Mother's Day. So if you are interested in learning more about gardening or attending more videos like this, or getting any resources related to gardening in the city, you're welcome to check out our garden party website at acehardwaredc.com. That link is also in the chat box as well as our contact information. And we are posting regular weekly content and new gardening information every week. You can also follow us on Instagram at cool_hardware, or on Facebook by searching for your store's local store's name. So all that information is in the chat, as well as CCAN's information. A little bit of housekeeping again, this conversation is recorded. It'll be available on our website and social media, and we'll send it out at the end of the discussion. We ask that you do stay muted throughout the call, but we'll open up the floor to questions at the end of the discussion. And if you have any questions you want to address while we're doing this chat, you're more than welcome to drop them in the chat box, and I'll address those at the end of the call. Perfect. So a little bit about Chesapeake Climate Action Network, or CCAN as they are called. They're a grassroots nonprofit organization founded in the early 2000s with a mission for to change climate policy in the Chesapeake Bay region. And I'd like to introduce for this call our CEO, Gina Schaefer, who is up in my top left Brady Bunch corner, but probably is not on yours. She'll be leading the conversation with CCAN staff members Janet Redman, who's the Director of Engagement and Partnerships, along with their resident invasive and ivy expert, Jesse Buff. Or is it Jesse or Jess?
Sorry, Jesse's fine. Thanks.
Jesse, perfect, awesome. So excellent, thank you all so much for being here and welcome. And Gina, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, sure. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Janet, I think we'll start with you. That was a brief introduction of your organization, but I'd love to hear more from you about CCAN and how you got started and what the organization is all about.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting us to the call today. And we are thrilled to be partnering with Ace Hardware, and particularly the stores that you run. I just find them to be so much fun. Tacoma Park is our local one. So
yay.
Yeah. So CCAN is the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and we were formed July 1st of 2002 with a grant from the Rockefeller brothers of $50,000. Our executive director is Mike Tidwell, and he is the driving force behind CCAN. He's the one that started this out of his garage almost 20 years ago. So our 20th anniversary will be next year. We started with a $50,000 grant, and 20 years later, our budget is $2 million. And what we are is the first nonprofit dedicated exclusively to fighting global warming in our region. Our mission is to build a diverse movement of people and communities with the goal of keeping us on a warming path of no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommendation for where we need to be. For 20 years, we have been an organization. We have lobbyists, organizers. We have a lawyer on staff who helps us draft some legislation ideas, and we're grassroots. So we start in the local communities and build up from there. We've been very successful in getting some really great climate legislation implemented and just raising awareness in general of what's going on in our region. But that's us in a nutshell.
Can I ask just a question of clarification? You said 1.5 degrees. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Is that an annual increase or? Sorry.
That is, yes, that's a great question. We throw it around. We just assume people understand. So 1.5 degrees Celsius is what the scientists are telling us is the most that our atmosphere can increase in temperature over, I think it's a 2000 and, I'm sorry, it's over the pre-industrial time frame. So we're talking about like the early 1900s. We do not want an increase of more than 1.5 degrees C because we see what's going on. It's something called tipping points in the climate. And when it gets warmer, glaciers melt, permafrost thaws, the oceans rise, sea level rise is a big problem in our region. We know that storms get stronger. If you live near Ellicott City, Maryland, or Norfolk, Virginia, you have experienced that firsthand. So the 1.5 degrees C is coming from a group of scientists who are part of the UN and the Conference of Parties, the COP that meets every year.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. Yes. Thank you very much. The audience
Sure.
might have some more questions about that too, but it's all very technical. And for those of us who, we hear the terms thrown around and they sound very serious as they are, but just understanding them can be a little tough. You mentioned the word grassroots. Can you give us a little bit more about some of your grassroots efforts and what that means to the organization?
Absolutely. Grassroots is really what we're all about. So in general, grassroots means that it is the kind of the most basic level of an organization. And for us, it is all of the citizens in the region, the communities who are most impacted by climate change issues. And so our organizers are some of our most valuable people because they are out in the communities. They are inviting local people to the rallies, and they're really how we get groundswell support. So things like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the ACP, you may remember hearing about that. It was shut down last year. It was a 14-year fight to shut this pipeline down that was going to carry oil through Virginia under the Appalachian Trail. It was going to go, through horrible places that we certainly don't need a pipeline to go through. And we were involved on the first day of the announcement from Dominion Energy that they wanted to build this pipeline. And our route to success there, or to the victory of shutting that pipeline down, was getting the local communities involved. So that's what we mean by grassroots, going to the people most impacted. You can call them ordinary citizens. I hate the term ordinary because I think it takes someone extraordinary to get involved and fight for things like this.
I'm sure in a case like that in particular, you had opponents that were much bigger and better funded, and that was
Absolutely.
something that you had to. Yeah.
That's a good,
Yeah.
Always.
We feel that way as a small and local business too. So
I bet
we could have some conversations about that. Tell me about some of the other wins that you've had. I think you guys have done, you've done so much. Obviously 20 years is a fantastic history for an organization, but what are some of the other big wins that you'd like us to know about?
Okay. Well, recently we have a couple of things have happened. Having a new administration in office that supports science, and we've seen what Biden is doing. He's got a climate change task force headed by Gina McCarthy. And it is allowing us to finally get some momentum behind some of our efforts, which we did not have in the prior 4 years. And you may have seen so many of the initiatives of the EPA were reversed over the last 4 years, and now we are, starting to see that come back to the forefront. We are back in, as a country, we are back in the Paris Agreement, which is huge. It puts us on the global stage as a player that can make some, can really help, with progress on the climate change front. But we've fallen behind. With CCAN, what we have been able to do in the past couple of years, even before we had a supportive administration, Virginia was always a kind of a coal-heavy state. And in the last year, we were able to get Virginia to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's known as RGGI, that's the synonym, RGGI. Basically, what it is, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a consortium of a bunch of East Coast states, 10 or 11 now. And what they're doing is putting caps on the amount of carbon dioxide that can be released into the atmosphere. And there are credits that can be bought and sold. So as a state cleans up their act, basically, they can make some money. Any money that is made is to be used for renewable energy initiatives, energy efficiency, things like that. It was a huge win in Virginia for us to have them join RGGI. We also recently passed, it's called a Clean Cars Initiative, which happened this past legislative session, which is going to make EVs, electric vehicle ownership, a lot more affordable and offer credits to across income ranges. So, everyone can eventually own an electric vehicle, which is much cleaner than the gas-fired one. We banned fracking in the state of Maryland a couple of years ago. So that was a big win. And we also have been very supportive of the Exxon New effort, which is, it's the fact that a lot of the big oil companies have known for decades that what they were doing was detrimental to the environment. And they did a really good job of documenting that, and that's how we know. So, their scientists were saying, this is not good. What we're doing is not going to be good for the planet, and it was hidden. So slowly we are seeing states and cities join lawsuits against big oil and suing big oil for things like that. So that's an effort that we support and try to encourage states and cities to take on.
It sounds like you are a much, much larger organization than you probably are staff-wise. It's just such amazing work that you're doing. I'm going to turn here just for a second, just for the sake of time, and talk to Jessie a little bit. So not to cut you off, Janet, I'm sure you have lots of things you can tell us. But Jessie, we want to talk a little bit about invasive species and what you're doing with CCAN in this regard. So I guess one of the questions is, how are invasive, if you could define invasive species for us first, and then talk about how they're contributing to climate change.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And then at some point, it'd be nice to talk about sort of what we're doing as a local organization. Please. As well. Yeah, so invasive, so we're talking about, there's lots of different kinds of invasive species, right? There's invasive animal species, insects, and plants. And today we're just talking about plants, but just to know that we're talking about, there are lots of different kinds of invasive species. And so invasive plant species don't necessarily, as far as I know, they don't necessarily contribute to climate change directly. But if you flip that question a little bit, they will be helped by climate change. So as the climate warms, a lot of the invasive plant species that we're talking about today, that we will be talking about today, and that are out there are going to take over places that have been disturbed, possibly by the effects of climate change. And so invasive plants, so plants sequester carbon, right? So that means that they store carbon, and they're one of our best ways to actually mitigate the effects of climate change. They take in carbon from the atmosphere and they store it. So invasive plants do that as well. And because they also grow so fast, they may do it better than native plants in the short term. However, to the extent that they alter functioning ecosystems and ecosystems that are being stressed by climate change, these invasive plant species are going to accelerate the loss of the species that can help us stem climate change. And well, I'll get into this shortly. Native species, the species that are supposed to grow where they are one of our best hopes for stemming climate change.
I had no idea. This is like completely fascinating to me, which I know it's supposed to be, but I really did not know that. So, so is the expectation or the goal then to eradicate them completely, and is that even possible?
So it really depends on the species that we're talking about. There are systems set up by our extension agencies, by agriculture departments, forest departments that detect early invaders, invasives that are moving from one place to another, that usually they're spreading from south to north with climate change. And so what you want to do is, if you can detect them early, is to really jump on them quickly. In most cases, because they're already established, though, management is your best hope.
And how can you give us some recommendations? I mean, I'm sure that people have come into our stores occasionally and have presented some species they want to get rid of. Who do they call? What do they do?
Right. So there are a number of species that pose a threat, throughout the Chesapeake Bay region. And I am not an expert in chemical use. I'm not certified in the chemical use of treating invasives, just in the mechanical treatment of invasive plant species. So in many cases, it is possible. What I suggest to people is that they start, where they live. Obviously, you want to start in your yard. You want to make sure that you're not spreading invasives by maintaining a yard that is free of invasives. So in that sense, it is possible to free your yard of invasive plant species. And then there are others that are going to require. So there are some that you can free entirely, and then you're just vigilant going forward. And then there's others that are going to require constant management. The ivies and some of the vines will keep popping up for a really long time, and so you have to be really vigilant just to keep clipping them, keep pulling them up, and just always looking for them, getting educated on what the species are, and then continuously looking for them and making sure that your property is not being invaded.
Is that what you mean by mechanical, is actually cutting them down or using?
Yeah, either cutting or pulling.
Okay, all right. Which is, I mean, it's not technical. I suppose the hardest part is identifying them first and then staying on top of them, because I know in Rock Creek, some of the places where I've gone in DC, like it's overwhelming once they get so big.
Exactly.
And is it possible at that point to even eradicate without taking down what's under? Is this what's happening with the native species then? Are they're suffocating them essentially? Yeah.
So they're being suffocated, and a lot of times, so what we're doing here in Tacoma Park is I went around and identified almost 5,000 trees that are being affected by climbing vines. So these are primarily English ivy, to a lesser extent winter creeper, and then there's other vines that were more difficult to identify in the winter because they're not evergreen, but usually it's porcelain berry. And sometimes wisteria and oriental bittersweet, all serious and invasives.
So now that you've identified them, what becomes the next step?
So the next step, so the reason that CCAN is interested in this work is because large trees sequester the most carbon. And so basically, that they're one of our best tools to fight climate change. Large trees that are already living, it's a lot easier to keep a tree where it is than actually planting a tree, and it's far less expensive. So the idea is that we save all these trees that are threatened by invasive vines, and not only do we protect our urban forest here in Tacoma Park, but we also keep these trees sequestering carbon, and sequestering carbon means that they're actually taking carbon in out of the atmosphere and storing it. And so the process is first to clear those trees, making sure that you're getting the vines off those trees and give them a chance to get healthy and let them keep living. And then secondarily, and this is probably this is where the homeowner comes in, making sure that homeowners can then begin to clear as much of the vines from their property as possible so that they don't continue to creep up the trees.
Okay. What else would you like to tell us about what CCAN is doing or what we can do to help or about this area of study of yours?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing to do is to learn your species, learn what the invasive ones are, what they look like, second, eradicate them from your property, but also have a plan, if you have large areas that are covered by some of these invasive species, you'll want to have a plan for what to replace them with. There are good ground covers that can replace English ivy. It's nice to have natives because a lot of what we get, there's a lot of interest now in pollinators and the threats to pollinators. A lot of these invasive species form biological deserts, basically. So a patch of English ivy that's on the ground in your yard or in the forest, maybe it's not creeping up the trees and threatening those canopy trees that are standing there, but it is creating a biological desert on the floor, the floor of the forest or in your yard. Barely any animals are interacting with that ivy or with other invasive species.
Interesting.
And so in terms of what you can do, if you've already done this in your yard and you want to do more, I think one thing you can do is definitely make sure that your local nurseries and hardware stores are not selling certain invasive species. There's still a lot that it's legal to sell. You want to make sure that they're not doing that. So learn what they are, and maybe you can pressure your local stores to not sell them. There are a lot of groups that do this kind of work. So if you're interested in branching out beyond your yard, find local parks that host invasive removal events. There are friends groups of local parks. I'm a weed warrior here in Montgomery County, Maryland as well, which means that I'm allowed, I've been certified by the county to actually go out into park areas and remove invasive plant species. But there are other weed warrior groups in the region as well.
I love that. I was going to, sorry, go ahead.
Lastly, I think another thing that you can do is once you learn what these species are, organize your neighbors to go do it. Go help other neighbors remove these species from their property. And that's basically what we're doing right now in Tacoma Park. We're having vine or tree freeing days every Saturday, where we get people together, we send them out, we give them the addresses that I identified that have trees that are threatened, and people can do that on their own. They can identify trees that are threatened in their own neighborhoods and go talk to those neighbors and offer to cut those vines off those trees.
Courtney, it sounds like we should put some notes up at the store about saving some of the trees in Tacoma Park.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jesse, I did want to ask how, as far as the mechanics go to cutting off this ivy, is it something that just anyone can do who has like a couple basic tools, or do you need something specific? Like, how difficult is it to actually remove this ivy?
It's pretty easy in most cases. It can be difficult if the vine is maybe thicker than your pinky or your thumb. So you really just need it. So if the vines are small, you can kind of pull them off on with just your hands. Make sure that there's no poison ivy. That's an important thing, because sometimes poison ivy, which I should note is a beneficial native species. It has a lot of beneficial properties for wildlife, but it is annoying to have it in your yard. I get that. It's a better left in natural forested areas. but it's good to know the differences between those species. So anyway, back to the mechanics. You know, a lot of it can be removed just by hand pulling. And then if it is thicker, you'll want to just have a pair of good pruning shears, and even in some cases a small pruning saw. And so in those cases, you want to clip, and you can look on our website for a video of how to do this, and some recommendations for how to do this. And but you're pulling the vines away from the bottom. Once you clip them at the bottom and at about head height, you want to clear basically a window around the tree. That's what we call the window technique, so that the vines can't continue to climb quickly. Sometimes the vines are so entrenched and stuck in the bark that it's hard to pull them off, and pulling them off will damage the bark. So the really important thing is to just cut it, you know, where, and make sure you're severing that connection to the plant under the ground. But the plant under the ground is probably going to still be alive. So you know, if you have the time and the energy, you want to pull as much of it out of the ground as possible. In some cases, in the best case scenario, if you know how to use herbicides, you can do what's called a cut stump method, which is where you're applying just a little bit of herbicide to that freshly cut vine. But again, I'm not an expert in that, but that is one method of addressing it. I've also seen some DIY techniques where you can actually add salt to English ivy to the freshly cut vine, which seems to work.
Courtney, it looks like we've had some great questions coming in. So if I could just read a couple of them. Is there any hope to save a neighbor's tree that's now 95% covered in English ivy? The tree is about 4 stories tall, and maybe this is what you were just saying, but I guess the question there is the hope piece, and maybe some suggestions for what to do there.
Yeah, so obviously the more it's covered, the more it's probably threatened, and the more its health has been compromised. But if there aren't a ton of dead branches, you know, if it looks to be healthy, otherwise, you know, I would say go for it and try to save that tree while you can, or at least give it a few more years of life. Basically, one of the things. So ivy and other climbing vines really affect trees in a couple ways. One is by the sheer weight, another is by blocking light, and the other is especially with English ivy, is that it basically, when it smothers the trunk, it's changing the local environment against the bark, so that moisture is really going to increase with that covering of vines around the trunk, and then that moisture begins to rot the bark, and pathogens can enter the tree. So that's how it wrecks the health of the host tree.
Thank you. Someone also asked about grapevine.
That's a really great question. We do have a couple of native grape species. Grapes have co-evolved with their host trees in the forest, and they're not really a threat to the health of those trees. Sometimes their weight can affect the trees, but it's rare. They generally, you know, they coexist, where the grapes don't threaten their host trees. And I should say, so where you can, don't cut grape, but do become educated in the differences between porcelain berry and grape, because porcelain berry is a non-native invasive species that you've probably seen blanketing trees in Rock Creek Park, for example.
Yeah.
And it is easily confused with grape. Okay.
In the interest of time, I think I'm going to throw it back over to Courtney to see if there are any other questions, or for you to wrap it up. It's fascinating. I'm sure everyone on the call knew more about this topic than I did, but I feel like I just got an MBA in the last 30 minutes. I'm so happy to be able to participate.
Excellent. Well, we can certainly keep answering some of the questions. Eventually, we will be timed out, though, and we'll have to all end. So just so everyone knows, I'll let this continue, answer a few more questions. And then at the end of the chat, I'll be sure to post it on our Facebook page, just any of our store Facebook pages, as well as our Instagram. And then you can also find it on our website at aceharbordc.com. So you can find this recording, and I'll also include more information on how to reach out to CCAN with some more pressing questions. One thing that came up in the chat box that I thought was of particular interest, especially to me as someone who took the Maryland Master Naturalist program, we learned a lot about this tree of heaven, Alianthus, and how it's crowding and cutting out big trees and just kind of popping up everywhere. Is there anything that you recommend for being able to eradicate that plant or just kind of manage that in addition to some of the other, would you use like the same tools that you're describing, or how do you get rid of that plant? Do you know?
So Ailanthus or tree of heaven is a tough one, especially in natural areas where it's established. I think professional help is usually needed. I think the key thing there is to, if you see it coming up, you want to try to pull it out as much as possible, pull it out by the roots, because as far as I know, if you cut it will then, I can't remember the term for this, but it basically sends a distress to the plant, and then it'll shoot up 10 more from its roots. So you basically want to pull it as much as possible if it's small. So definitely learn what it looks like. It has a distinct smell when you rub its leaves, but it can be confused with walnut and with sumac, both native species. So you want to make sure that you're not pulling those species. But if they're established trees, I think you do need to use herbicide, and I don't know what the recommended procedure is for that. It's probably some sort of what they call cut stump technique where you're actually cutting it and then painting the cut with a little bit of herbicide, probably something like Roundup. But again, I'm not an expert in that.
One of our attendees mentioned that Delaware last month updated their Invasive Species Act by making it illegal to plant 37 various invasives, including English ivy, which is killing canopy trees all around Annapolis. They said it's not going into practice until July 2022, but it was passed unanimously, and they're hoping to send it to their senator. Is CCAN doing any work with advocating against, really for the native plants and against the practical sale of all these invasives? Or
That's a good question. I read that also. I don't know that we are doing that specifically, but I agree that it would be something to institute in Maryland as well. So if we could stop the sale of these plants at some of the larger nurseries, that's a great way to stop the process.
Yeah, and I should add, it is a good niche, that it's an available niche for local organizations, because plenty of conservation organizations educate about the threat of invasive species, but I'm not sure how many of them actually do advocacy related to the sale and control of invasive species.
Very cool. Well, I think that answers all of the questions that we had. If anyone feels like they didn't get a chance to submit theirs, you have just a minute left. A couple things I will say. We do currently have of course, thank you to Janet and Jesse for being here. This has just been a wonderful experience, and it's such a pleasure to be working with CCAN in this capacity, and it ties in very well to our garden party. We also, for those of you who are local to the DC or Baltimore area and shop at any of our 13 locations, we have a roundup at our registers. It's a fundraiser for CCAN that's happening now through Sunday. So far we've raised over $1,000 for CCAN through just collecting pennies at a time, and all that money definitely makes a difference when it comes to the type of work that they're doing grassroots in our organization. And obviously, based on what Janet shared with us at the beginning of the call, all these efforts from their very minimal staff that are small but mighty are making big the way that our climate is impacted in the Chesapeake Bay area. So we really appreciate what you all are doing, and also to all of our customers for stopping by and making that donation. So really grateful, and don't forget to round up if you shop at our stores. And again, one last thing, any of this information again is on aceharbordc.com, as well as our garden party. We're doing some more chats about the cicadas this week coming up in the next week or so. We've got an Ask a Gardener link, which I dropped into the chat box. So if you have any questions that didn't get answered, or you would like to ask any other gardening related questions, you're welcome to do so through that resource, and one of our ACE experts or local partners, partnering experts will be able to get back to you with an answer within 48 hours. I think that's it. I really, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Gina, thank you for taking the time out of your day
My
to
pleasure.
join us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the
Excellent.
questions
So-
and knowledge as well.
Yes. Have a great day. And
Yeah.
again, thank you so much. Very grateful. I was excited to have this call with you all. So
Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Keep
Bye-bye.
up the good work. Thanks.
Thank you.